All right, we're rolling in here another episode of Israel Unfiltered. I'm your host, Yoel Israel. Please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm really excited about our guest today, Michael Granoff. And you'll correct me if I'm not saying that exactly perfectly. I suppose there's a lot of different ways to say your name. For those that don't know about Michael, who also goes by Mike, he is the managing partner of Maniv. They are a VC in Tel Aviv, founded in 2015. And I think you have about a $250 million under management. And you invest mostly in mobility and auto companies, technology companies in particular. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So the first thing I want to just jump right into is there's a recession in the technology industry. How much are you feeling that in general? And do you think that, let's say, the industry, when it comes to auto tech and fleets, do you think that they're feeling it better or worse than, let's say, the rest of the other technology companies?
Well, I would say that the mobility technology industry, and we can talk about exactly what that means, but it certainly constitutes all the electric vehicle companies, some of which are automakers, some of which are battery makers, and other types. Many of them went public, often via SPAC over the last few years. And for this sector, what we've experienced over the last 6 to 12 months is really commensurate to the dot-com bust, meaning a lot of companies going out of business, a lot of companies whose stocks are down 90% or more. And so I think that we have, as far as our sector is concerned, that we've seen the worst of it. The baby has been thrown out with the bathwater, and there are a lot of very excellent companies with excellent prospects that are available at a very steep discount at the moment. As far as our business in particular is concerned, we invest mainly at the seed stage. And the seed stage investing is as insulated as one can be from these macroeconomic conditions, because we're looking at companies that have not actually been valued yet, and we're actually less concerned about what is the value of the company than can we get enough equity to accommodate the risk that we're taking and to still keep the team incentivized to build a big business. And those things don't have a lot to do with the outside conditions. Right. It's just maybe on the margins.
Well, what does it take in order to keep a team that properly incentivized for the long term? Often when it comes to a recession and their cash flow issues, particularly, let's say, with suddenly your burn rate, people worry that it might be longer in between funds, how much their valuation, crashed. And a lot of things feel like they're almost like upside down or underwater, so to speak. How does one stay motivated for the long term as opposed to just try to survive until, let's say, the economic situation changes?
Well, the most important thing, of course, is for the company to be well capitalized, because it doesn't matter how motivated you are. If you don't have the capital to keep the business going, you're not going to succeed. So that's certainly priority number one. But remember that these companies that we're involved in, for the most part, are very young, and what's important to them about market conditions is really not market conditions today, but market conditions in 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, when they're actually out there, being compared to similar companies in the sector. So the one thing that we're being careful about is making sure that the companies that we invest in have enough money that the founders can focus on building the business over a period of time. Around 2 years is pretty much what we want to see in terms of runway. And aside from that, one thing I can tell you is that the decline in the macroeconomic environment perhaps has had the opposite effect in terms of company creation and the volume of early stage deals. We're seeing more than ever. And
why is that?
Well, there's a lot of theories about it. I don't know in particular. I just know that virtually every month we get more companies than we did the month before. Some of that might be that other VCs are are being somewhat gun shy, and so they're spreading their net wider. Some may be that there are talented entrepreneurs that maybe a year or two ago couldn't resist the types of packages they could get from big tech companies to work there, and now are pursuing their own dreams as those opportunities aren't there anymore. Those are a couple of theories. There could be others, but bottom line is we're seeing more company creation and more inbound deal flow than ever.
If someone were going to start, so let's say these companies that you're speaking to now, if they wanted to get in, they want to start create something now during this very challenging economic conditions, what recommendation would you give them?
Well,
would your recommendation change, let's say from a year ago or 2 years ago or anything during a bull market?
At seed stage, not so much. The only thing is that there really does have to be a fundamental problem that you're solving and a protectable advantage that you have. But if you have those things and you have a great idea, now is a fine time to go out and try to raise money from funds like ours that invest at seed stage. And it's certainly a much harder time for companies that are further along. Companies that are looking to raise Series A's, B's, C's. But as far as we're concerned, this is a great opportunity to continue to identify the best founders and the best ideas in the sector that we invest in.
Would you say those that are starting companies now, those entrepreneurs tend to be better than those that started in the bull market? Are you seeing that? I'm trying to see if there's a kind of a personality trait of the entrepreneur that would go ahead and create a business in this environment as opposed to not. Are you seeing anything? We may not be exactly sure why there's an increase now, but I would like to get a vibe if there's a different kind of personality. Are you seeing that more of them are, let's say, serial entrepreneurs? Maybe they're not first-time founders, or is there any kind of theme among them that you see that maybe you can share with us?
I don't think that I have sensed a variation in the quality of the deal flow that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of very interesting and promising companies now, but that was true also a year or two ago. We're seeing a higher volume now, and I'm not sure if it's a higher volume of better companies, but I don't think there's any diminution in the proportion of the companies that we're seeing that are worth a second look.
Got it. All right. So I have a question about how do you get into mobility, fleets, car? How does one get into this? Have you always been a car lover? Or explain to me how you found your niche. I always find it fascinating when people get into a niche. I find people often stumble in it. How did you get here?
Stumble is probably the right way to describe it.
Right.
Wasn't from a passion about cars or transportation. What it was, frankly, was 20 years ago, living in Manhattan in the period following 9/11. I noticed something that I think a lot of people have noticed again over the last year, which is that decisions around foreign policy, national security are not always made in the most pure ways, because energy policy considerations tend to distort policymakers' thinking on those issues. And that was highly frustrating to me 20 years ago. And I started to follow that thread and discovered that at that time, the US was actually importing 70% of its oil. And most importantly, oil was, and I would say still is, a monopoly on transportation. And the price of oil is not set in a free market. The OPEC cartel meets quarterly. They decide what the output's going to be, and that effectively decides what the price is going to be. Effectively, what that's doing is putting a tax on every person on the planet. And so this whole state of affairs was frustrating to me as I understood it better. And at a certain point, I sat with a very talented friend who is from Washington, D.C., and we outlined an organization which he went and built. It's called Securing America's Future Energy. It can be found at secureenergy.org. And that organization over nearly 20 years now has achieved a lot in Washington. Most interestingly, perhaps in 2006, we championed a bill that had, among many other things, the first incentives on electric vehicles in the world. And I latched onto that because I actually identified it as the only thing that could conceivably scale to impact the monopoly of oil in transportation, and learned about energy storage and batteries, and came to understand that there was a scientific consensus that the price of energy storage was going to decline by an order of magnitude over a decade or so, and told everybody I knew I was going to bet the rest of my career on electric cars. So the
how's that going? How's that bet working out?
Well, I was going to say the postscript to that part of the story is about 6 months later, in February of 2007, I had the good fortune to meet the two most interesting people who were thinking about ideas around this. One of them, incidentally, through Shimon Peres, and that was the good news. The bad news is I picked the wrong one, and I made what some have described as the biggest binary blunder in the history of investing. And I bet on an Israeli guy named Shai Agassi over a South African guy named Elon Musk. So that was spent the next 5 years doing all things Better Place, which I'm sure many of your listeners will recall. Some of them may have recently seen some of the big white dinosaurs alongside the highways in Israel that used to be called battery switch stations. So that was my unusual path in this direction.
So you were the first investor in Better Place, correct?
I was the first investor in Better Place. I was on the board of Better Place, and I was also in the company for virtually all of its life, doing lots of different things, including trying to influence the Obama administration early in its tenure around the fate of General Motors and the Energy Department's loan guarantee program.
What did you think about the bailouts of the automotive industry? I think everyone except Ford got a bailout, right?
That's correct. The most consequential one was General Motors, and right. I had some success in kind of infiltrating the task force that President Obama put together to decide the fate of General Motors, and we actually had several very productive sessions. When I say we, I mean the Better Place team, with this task force in the Treasury building next to the White House. And I think we actually did manage to convince that panel that the right policy was that it shouldn't be a unconditional bailout of General Motors, but that the bailout should be conditioned on building a 21st century automaker, not bailing out a 20th century automaker, which means to go all electric. Of course, P.S. 6 years later, that's exactly what GM independently said they were going to do. Could have happened at that time, and GM would be much more competitive today, and the U.S. would be much more competitive with China, and maybe Better Place would still be around. But we, as much as we were able to convince that panel, they were unable to convince the White House.
Yeah. For those that don't know, Better Place started, like it's about 20 years ago. You're the first investor. What it does was, in short,
15 years ago this week.
15 years ago. Oh, very good. Good timing. In short, instead of charging your car, which you could do, what you did was you went and a robot came under your car, kind of like a car wash in a way, removed the depleted battery or low battery and replaced it with a fully charged battery. So instead of waiting for a long time for it to charge, in a few minutes, you can literally continue on your way with the full battery. And throughout Israel, you can find a bunch of these charging stations randomly. Yeah, so it's unfortunate.
Most importantly, was that the battery was not just disconnected from the car physically, but ownership-wise. So Better Place owned all the batteries, which mean that Better Place customers could go and buy their cars without a premium. To buy an electric car without a premium 10 years ago, was quite something. And
how much the battery? Like, how much would the car cost with and without the battery?
Well, at that time, the premium on the battery could have been $15,000 or $20,000. It's less now, but so that it made quite a difference if you didn't have to buy the battery.
Right. Yeah. Wow. That's pretty significant. Yeah. So let's talk about the technology of cars. Um, other than, let's say, well, I want to address electric, but first let's talk safety. How has safety changed over time?
Well, until just a few years ago, safety was moving in the right direction for several decades, and it's because of technology, because of things like airbags and better engineering and all of that. The reason it reversed course in the last few years, I think, is pretty clearly from distraction. That we're now tethered to devices and have a hard time untethering when our focus is needed on driving. But obviously, like everything else in life, technology is becoming more and more a part of the driving experience, and mostly for good. And I think the types of safety systems, some pioneered, by the way, by the most valuable company in Israel, which is Mobileye, are saving thousands of lives a year for sure.
Yeah, it's damn impressive. It's amazing technology. I'm sure a lot of people don't even know that it's in their cars. I want to shift gears here for a minute. I want to talk about the future of automotive. One from an energy perspective, and then I also want to talk about driverless cars. Because I have some strong opinions. A lot of people think I'm nuts. So let's start with the strong opinions first. All right. So where do you live, Mike? Do you mind me ask?
Renana.
Renata. Okay, very nice. So Tel Aviv is currently trying to build for the last generation. I'm exaggerating, a light rail. Right now, I've been strongly against rail for a couple reasons, and people think I'm crazy, particularly because I work so much in tech and everyone loves rail for some reason. I don't understand it. I see it as old technology. You need to commute to the rail, get on the rail, sometimes switch, and then when you get off, you're still not often at your final destination. You have to go. You have to then get back on. It can get hot and humid and sunny in Tel Aviv, particularly for several months a year. It's some places, rain sucks too, and so it's not luxurious experience. It's not enjoyable. It's very expensive and it's old technology. Why are we still investing in this? My opinion is that we should be reaching out to someone. Let's say you said you should have maybe bet on 20 years ago, Elon Musk, and say, Israel, we have the best place for driverless full FSD, right? Full self driverless cars. We're an island in a sense. No cars leave Israel. No cars come in from outside of Israeli borders. We're very small. We're very technologically advanced, and the government would obviously be supportive of it, particularly the Israeli government, regardless of what political parties are in the government. I would feel. I mean, it's obviously much safer, and it clears up traffic. You don't need traffic lights. You don't need traffic circles when all of the cars are communicating with each other instead of waiting for after a red light when it turns green. You don't wait for the first car to go, and then the second car starts driving, and then the third starts driving. Like a train, you can all go together because everything's communicating with each other. This is not new. People understood this for decades. Do you know why we're going into all this light rail stuff?
Well, you are describing a fairly utopian vision of autonomous
Yep.
drive. One that I might be too old and too jaded to think is in any way really practical.
Wait. So utopian, but also unachievable, would you say?
Certainly unachievable in the near term, because we're not
How would you define your term?
we're not dealing with a blank canvas, for one thing, right?
That's true.
We're dealing with existing metropolises that have already have infrastructure. But I'll tell you one other thing, which is that I'm no great physicist, but it's if you just sort of sketch out the how many people per square meter you have, for example, in the mass transit situation on a bus or in a rail versus in a car, whether that car is fully optimized and part of a network, as you described, and I think technologically you're exactly right. All that is achievable. You still, you have enough people want to go in a certain direction, not necessarily solving the congestion problem. And there's one other thing, which is they have to remember that I like to say mobility is the most demand elastic of all industries, which is to say that you make it cheaper and easier for people to go places, they'll go more places. That's why in LA, they add lanes to the freeway and traffic gets worse. And I think that this is kind of the type of situation that there is actually no end to, because you can imagine, even if it was optimized that everybody could go every place that they wanted and assume that it was spread out enough that it wasn't all the same place at the same time. If you move across town several miles, you find a new dry cleaner. Well, what if you really liked your old dry cleaner, and what if there was no cost to continuing to use it with an automated system for pickup and delivery? You could use your old drive or the better pizza place 10 miles away. So now you want your pizza to come. So the point I'm making is just that there is kind of no end to the potential demand for mobility. So there's always going to be a balance. And look, I don't know whether the Tel Aviv light rail was the right policy decision at the time, or whether it's the right thing now. We'll hopefully begin to find out not too long. There's a beautiful looking station right outside our office that I'm anxious to try.
A station that doesn't have a train?
Not yet, but hopefully soon.
Those abandoned better place stations are pretty too.
I'm very sympathetic to the vision that you described, but I don't think it's potentially achievable in our lifetimes.
Well, so really in our lifetime, I'm not sure, you might be a year or two older than me, but you don't think, like, I don't know, I feel like they started this light rail, I don't know how long ago. I remember they were doing the Jerusalem light rail a bunch ago, and it's gorgeous. It's beautiful light rail, the Jerusalem one. It's very nice, but I feel that we're going to be at a place that, I mean, we're going to have more and more congestion, right? Israel's small. Our population, thank God, is growing. That we're going to need to find a way to prevent traffic. And I find that driverless cars would be the only way. You don't think, though, I don't understand what's wrong with I understand that there are challenges that, like, you can't move towers, right? We're not playing SimCity here, right? We have already infrastructure they need to deal with. I mean, the infrastructure of a train is, in my opinion, far more complicated, right? You to put down rails and all that. But this is what I never liked about trains. This is why I think buses are better than trains, because as a population and neighborhoods change, the bus route can just change like this. The rail can't. And so it's not adaptable. It's, and I was like, not adaptable to population changes, to demographics, to new neighborhoods. It's not adaptable to new technologies. It's not adaptable to, it's very limited in a sense. So that's why I was wondering that I feel like it's totally achievable to be able to do it. I do understand that we're talking about 20 years from now, right? Let's say my vision. I do understand that, but it took us at least 15 years to do this light rail in Tel Aviv. And by the time they built it, I think it's the stops are probably not necessarily at the best places. So I don't know. I really feel like there's something there.
In defense of rail for a moment, I think New York City subway
defense
system.
Of rail, that's terrific. The New York City subway system.
It has stood the test of time, and I think that it still is very often the most efficient way to get around Manhattan. And
I agree with
people
you.
Who can afford.
Unless you have a helicopter.
But look, we talk about autonomous vehicles in cities, and I have a nuanced opinion on that, but
please,
but I don't think
I'd be interested in it.
Sure, I mean, I just can say I don't think it's the panacea for relieving congestion. That you're
okay. How come? So tell me why I'm
wrong. Because in the vision that you're describing, it has to be exclusively automated vehicles, and to get to exclusively automated vehicles in a orchestrated system run by AI, presumably,
correct.
You would need to go several steps beyond even what is conceived of right now, which is already many years behind where people thought it would be. So there are a lot of not just technological, but I would say sociological challenges to the vision that you lay out. Maybe one day we will get there. There'll be some places that will take the lead and demonstrate that is the best way. But remember, people have very emotional feelings about their cars, and what you're describing really would say, you can't really have personal vehicles in that environment. They would have to all be part of a system.
Why couldn't you have a personal vehicle that you'd get in? I understand that you may not be doing the driving, but why couldn't you can also have it like an Uber, like an app, which makes it more affordable. So I'll give like an example, right? So my grandmother, blessed memory, I remember she passed away before us marriage, like it was over 12 years ago. I remember before, when she was still driving, I'm like, she should not be driving. I was like scared for my life when she was driving. She didn't look, no turn. She just turned like whatever she wanted. It was worrying. And I remember when my mother and her siblings had to tell her, you can no longer drive. It was devastating to her that once she felt like she lost her freedom and her autonomy. So, I mean, being able to have, whether your own car or not, push a button in the app and be able for you to get in the car, take you to your destination, do your own shopping, because she was good enough to do shopping and all of that. But let's just say her vision and all that, she wasn't good enough. Her driving put her at risk. She wasn't a risk to do anything else. I find that as a great solution for a lot of elderly people, or even handicapped people, even blind people, or people, whatever. I think it provides a lot of opportunities for people that have trouble getting around. I know so I see there's like a lot of opportunity. I see a lot of moral reasons to move in this direction. Also, it becomes, like you were saying, even if you don't own your own car, but suddenly in an app you can be taken to wherever you want when you want. I find that is a future that we should all pursue. I agree that we're not going to see in the next decade. I do think we could see in 2 decades, because we could start to introduce cars, let's say like Tesla, that have full self-driving, but it's not necessarily enabled until we get to a point where all the new cars on the road are fully self-driving. So we can get there in a couple decades, and then we can maybe start to turn it on and obviously, let's say, be testing it in certain just towns and communities, etc., first, just to see how it goes, and then expand it outward.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to what you just said. I'll start by saying, in the case of what you described by your grandmother, 100%. People who cannot drive because they're too old, or because they're too young, or because they're unable to, or if they just don't want the responsibility of it, should have options. And in fact, they do. They do today in the forms of Ubers and Get Taxi and so forth. And those things will in fact become more automated over time. I don't have any doubt about that. That's a different. That's something different than what you described before, which is what I described as the utopian vision of a city in which all traffic is orchestrated to avoid congestion and optimize routes so that everybody can get where they're going as efficiently as possible without the need for stops and lights and so forth. And that's what I'm saying. I think is a step beyond what I think is achievable in any reasonable period of time.
No, I agree. It's far out, but I think, like I was saying, there's a few steps we can get there, right?
Yeah.
Cars can have a full FSD, but not be enabled, right? You can start incorporating different apps and different things.
I think that's exactly right. And I think what we're living in now, as far as mobility is concerned, is the age of diversification enabled by digital technologies. It's interesting to note that, I think the important consumer product introduction in the history of mankind was the Ford Model T, which was September 1st, 1908. Before a car that people could afford, most people died within 50 miles or so where they were born, never went further. Obviously, that revolutionized the world. And what's interesting is that 100 years to the month later, in September of 2008, came the App Store, and I think that more than anything demonstrates what you're describing in terms of the age of mobility diversification, enabling things like Waze and Uber and Lyft and Bird and Lime and all of the other options for getting around cities. We've talked a lot about commuting in Tel Aviv. We haven't mentioned lighter weight vehicles, which are proliferating and are enormously successful, if nowhere else, in Tel Aviv.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
For me personally, that's the only way that I'll move around Tel Aviv. Honestly, it's what's the point of? And certainly, you don't want to bring your own car in, as far as I'm concerned.
That is correct. Yeah, I live further north, and I will never drive into Tel Aviv. Maybe once on a Friday, because it was my wife to the embassy or whatever, the consulate. I live in Pardes Chana. You take the car to the train, you park, you take the train.
Exactly. And then within Tel Aviv, these scooters or e-bikes are available from Lime, and obviously many people have their own two-wheelers. Are, I think, by far the best way to get around Tel Aviv, and have been made more so by the increase of infrastructure, by the increase of bike lanes, which now really enable you to go virtually anywhere in the city without having to be concerned about encountering cars. If you use them safely. So yeah, I mean,
no, I know, like, it goes without saying, but it needs to be said. Yeah, because those things, I know, once a week, I know someone gets hurt, breaks a leg, a toe. It's like, what happened to your face because they fell off those scooters or whatever, hit a curb or something. Yeah.
But yeah, I think there is a great vision for micromobility, for lighter weight vehicles, to so forth, to increase mobility in cities. And in fact, within cities, most trips are fairly short, don't require a 5,000-ton vehicle. I think the proof is in the pudding in terms of how successful those vehicles have been in Tel Aviv. Of course, not every city is as flat, has this good weather, and has the demographics that enable the success that it's had in Tel Aviv. But I think has set a pretty good example worldwide.
So you're all in on electric, you said, right? Electric vehicles.
Yep. Electric vehicles of all shapes and sizes, indeed.
Amen. Love it. Okay. So am I. Let me ask you, so a lot of challenges that people talk about is, one, I guess, is people talk like environmentally, people think that it's green, but obviously how you're recharging and filling up your batteries might not be the most greenest source. And someone even talk about, I think 16 out of like the 9, like overwhelmingly all of the lithium that we need is found in the Congo, correct? And correct me, by the way, if I'm saying anything that's all fact or you want to add some color to it, right? I think 90% of it are things in the Congo, and 16 of those 19 main factories are owned by China. What kind of challenges does this pose when it comes to, I mean, one, environmental, two, human rights, not just China, but how those people that are actually treated that are at the Congo, that are working there? And then what does that mean to the fact that a communist country that abuses human rights at scale, that they're the one that it seems like we're going to have to go through them in order to get the batteries, the lithium for the batteries in the future? What are the solutions for people in the West that, let's say, are pro-human rights?
Well,
and pro-electric.
There's a lot in that question, and
okay.
Sorry. You've also triggered one of my favorite and most frustrated topics,
which is,
first, let me the competitiveness between the West and China on EVs, which I identified, I think, earlier than most in 2008.
Thank you.
And was screaming from the rooftops in 2009 for the Obama administration to
did they listen? What was that like? Because I said the same thing about semiconductors in Taiwan. I've been saying that forever, right? And,
yeah, well, I can actually give you a very vivid description. On the 31st of March of 2009, I had breakfast with the Washington bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal, Neil King, and I sold him on this idea that this was the great untold story of China making a bet on EVs. Why? For three reasons. One, they had a problem with their air quality in their cities. And the easiest way to fix air quality is get rid of all the tailpipes. And if you don't care at all about the emissions issue, you can put a coal factory just outside the city and solve that problem by doing EVs. The second is that they, at that time, China was hockey sticking on car adoption. They went from well behind the U.S. rate to well ahead of it within the space of just a few years. And with that, they also began to have the same oil import and dependence problem as the U.S., and they wanted to solve that. But most importantly, they saw that they did not need to compete in the 20th century game of internal combustion technology development. They could leapfrog that, go right to the EVs where they already had an advantage in the manufacture of devices and things like that, and secure, as you've described, a lot of the raw materials and the rare earth minerals required for battery supply chain. So anyway, I sold Neil King on this story. And then the next day, April 1st, 2009, you can look it up. The lead story in the New York Times was exactly this: China bets big on electric vehicles. And Neil was upset, thinking I had also pitched it to the Times, which I had not. They found it on their own. But that has stayed in my mind because that was kind of the moment, I think, where it became apparent to everyone about this competition. Unfortunately, I don't think the Obama administration played it correctly, even though they were very sympathetic to the idea of clean energy and infrastructure and so forth, but did not make a lot of the right bets to put the U.S. ahead. And the other thing that then happened unexpectedly is that the U.S. developed a shale. And what that did was it took the U.S. from 40 years of declining oil production to all of a sudden massive increases in oil production, and the 70% import dependence on oil turned around 180 degrees. And
right.
That had a lot of, I don't totally begrudge that because it was good for the U.S., for the economy, for job creation, for trade balance. However, it took the pressure off to really race China on EVs. And that I regret, because the U.S. Does find itself and the West, well behind China now on EVs. And all you got to do in Israel is drive down the aisle and look at the billboards every week. There's another new Chinese EV company that is bringing 100,000 shekel EV into Israel, and they are beginning to sell like hotcakes. And that troubles me for a number of reasons, including a lot of the ones that you laid out there.
Right. Okay. So, but do you think, even though if, let's say, shale didn't explode, the technology of fracking, and I believe actually America became an energy exporter, which was amazing, I think, under the Trump administration during that time. But I mean, even if, let's say, that didn't happen, I feel that no one was really keeping an eye on China anyway, right? I mean, we probably wouldn't have.
They weren't keeping an eye on China.
I feel like domestic. I feel like there's a problem with America in general, is that their political issues in general, how things are set up. They're overwhelmingly focused on domestic, and they don't really see how foreign plays things, kind of like their own bubble. I don't even think they would have played. I didn't think they would have cared. I don't think they would have done anything anyway. Even if,
if shale and fracking hadn't come along, oil probably would have stayed over $100 a barrel. People probably would have.
Right. I agree with that. It would have been over $89.
And that would have incentivized EV adoption, both at the consumer level and at the production level. And more people would have invested in battery plants in the U.S., for example. All of that, I think, would have happened.
So right now we're dependent, the West, let's say, overwhelmingly on China for rechargeable batteries. That includes my phone. That includes my laptop that are plugged into. That includes my Nintendo Switch that's in the corner. That includes literally my watch, everything, right? So what does this mean?
Yeah, it's a problem, but it's also the type of problem that innovation ultimately solves. The key word, of course, being ultimately, and I totally agree with you that given the geopolitics, given the moral issues at stake in this, it's problematic that is the case now. And I think the West should be making every conceivable bet, both in terms of public policy and in terms of private investment to resolve that. There was a time in the late 19th century when the internal combustion engine was developed, that people thought most of the oil in the world was in Northeast Pennsylvania. And then it turned out that oil was in lots of other places where there was an economic incentive to discover it. So I don't believe that Congo has a monopoly on lithium, or that China has discovered all of the places where we can get the materials that we need to build a supply chain on batteries. And I do have to say that as much as I didn't agree with much of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that passed the U.S. Congress last year, signed by President Biden, and has very little to do with fighting inflation. There were actually,
if anything, the opposite.
Yeah, but there were
trillions of dollars.
There were some very positive impulses in that actually would have been good policy a decade ago, and hopefully better late than never. And a lot of the mechanisms of it are a little bit convoluted and difficult to implement, but hopefully it will play out somewhat like the spirit of it, which is to do exactly what we're describing and build supply chains for these important industries in the West.
Got it. Okay, so what do you think are what are the challenges? How do we overcome these? It sounds like when it comes to, let's say, we're assuming, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm also not saying that you're right, that we'll find other places where there will be lithium in freer nations where maybe America would have the opportunity to get it. But at the same time, I mean, if it could be in Africa or other places, I mean, China is extremely imperialist and takes over a lot of major ports and a lot of infrastructure things from other countries. And I don't know why would you think, one, that there's another place, two, that we'll find it, three, in time, and four, that you think that, let's say, the West would be able to lead that the excavations for this technology or for these resources.
Look, none of this is simple. None of this is going to happen quickly or cheaply. Right. But I think that with the right policy focus and with the right incentives and with free market forces leading the way, that these problems will get solved over time. And maybe that we discover an alternative to lithium. Maybe it's
that was my next question. Like, what about alternatives? Hydrogen.
Lithium is just one of the minerals required in today's conventional battery industry. The organization that I mentioned earlier, Securing America's Future Energy, SAFE, has a mineral program now to exactly help governments and industries focus on this and figure out what the right approaches are. I think thought leaders like that, industry leaders, and hopefully there are a few smart policymakers left somewhere coming together. I think we'll eventually get there, but I'm not diminishing the problem that you're identifying. It is a problem.
Do you think there's any kind of future maybe in hydrogen, or, I mean, nuclear fusion I know is far away, but you see how much cleaner and safer that it is and how little emissions that it actually has. Do you think that any kind of that technology will ever be able to be used when it comes to automotives?
So let's take those one at a time, because I have very different answers for each. Hydrogen, I have to admit, I have had a bias against for a long time, and it's best illustrated by a speech that was given by then President Bush in April of 2003, when he said that a child born today, her first vehicle might be a hydrogen-powered vehicle. Well, my daughter was born the following week, and her first vehicle was an electric vehicle. Will a child born today have their first car be hydrogen? I tend to doubt that as well.
George Bush the third. Just kidding.
I'm a hydrogen skeptic, although
Why are you a skeptic? I'm asking because of your expertise and your passion and interest in it. I'd like to hear why you think you're skeptical.
Because I don't see a lot that can be done with hydrogen that can't be done with electric, and the pace of progress on electric has been much faster than it has been on hydrogen. A lot of unkept promises there. That said, there are some smart people I know who are involved in hydrogen projects, and I keep an open mind, and I'm determined this year actually to spend some time with them and learn more and try to open my mind some more on hydrogen. But for now, consider me skeptical. You mentioned fusion. And by the way, I think that this is one of the great, so far, under-discussed items.
I agree. I don't know why people aren't talking about it. It solves all of the energy problems, from environmental to how much space, to clean, to getting rid of the waste, to even be reusing the waste. It's insane what it looks like now. But just so people don't know, the energy that you'll consume, and it will only get better over time, the nuclear waste of an entire human life is smaller than a can of your entire life. That's the waste of an individual. And they're expecting it to obviously be less and less and less. And now they're actually even be able to reuse that waste. So it's net zero, clean, takes up less space, and costs almost nothing. Am I exaggerating?
I don't think you're exaggerating. From what I understand, the Biden administration heralded this breakthrough just a month or two ago with great fanfare that I think was well-deserved. And I'll just be interested. I'm participating in the panel on clean energy in San Francisco next week, and have other conversations on the topic. And thus far, and it hasn't been that long, but thus far I have not seen people adapt to this reality. And
why?
It's curious as to why. I think part of it may just be habitual, and part of it might be that people are nervous about inhibiting investment in renewables that have decades of amortization that could be threatened by something like this. And there may be a segment of the public as well that has a conscious or subconscious resistance to the implications of this, which I think are tremendous economic growth and wealth, and that we can all look forward to as a society, and frankly shouldn't surprise us at the pace of progress over the last 100, 200 years, that this would be the next step in that. I think it's extremely exciting. I'm not Pollyannish about it, that I think it's going to be commercialized anytime soon. But even if it's 20, 30, 40 years, it's still enormously important to have on the radar and be thinking about. And to your point on hydrogen, again, if you are able to produce limitless electricity with fusion, then why wouldn't you have only electric vehicles?
Right, that's a good point. Right, and yeah, what other energy what other technology and energy do you think is imperative for the future of automotive? Because we talk about AI, that right, cars need to be able to communicate with each other, maybe even other traffic, right? So AI, which over time and will be fed back in, and obviously Tesla's leading there. The other's electric. Tesla's also leader, is also imperative. Right, batteries, lithium. And we talked about supply chain in particular. We're hopeful, but we don't know exactly what that means. It could even be other technologies may come into the car that might replace or subs. Do you think that maybe there could be do you think maybe the future might not be in the car itself, might not be a battery? We might find some kind of, but nuclear or something. Do you think, or do you believe that will be electric and let's say for the next 100 years?
100 years is a long time, but we did have more than 100 years.
That's why I asked 100.
We had more than 100 years of dominance by the internal combustion engine and oil.
But also technology hasn't changed at the same rapid pace. It's been let's say from 1908 to 1928, then let's say it's been from 1903, then it's been 2003, then 2023.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you look at other aspects of life, digitization has completely revolutionized information and communication. And I think digitization, of which I consider electrification to be a form, is going to have that same kind of impact on transportation. And I think a lot of that's going to happen in this decade. So.
Okay. What other technologies are imperative for the future of the automotive industry that you're seeing? And maybe you can talk a little bit about your portfolio companies that you're involved with, and what do you think that they're doing that can kind of shed some light on what the future of car manufacturing OEMs, what maybe I think that you probably have a better view under the hood, pardon the pun, of kind of what's coming, of the future of the automotive industry when it comes to technology. Is there anything that you can maybe share with us that we should just kind of know about?
Yeah, well, I think all the many of the talking points that I used for a decade or more are now becoming so mainstream that aren't necessarily worth repeating. But people, there was just last week that the Wall Street Journal found that 2022, 10% of car sales
Cars
globally
are electric. Yeah, it's crazy, right? That shocked me.
We're electric. Yeah. And so my response was, are you allowed to say I told you so if your prediction came true 10 years late? Most people seem to say yes. But the point is,
I'll say yes. Do you want to say it here? Go ahead, say it.
So, but
I told you so.
But the point is, I think we have hit the tipping point, and there are constraints. Obviously, we talked about supply chain and price and so forth. But I think one constraint that has diminished tremendously is social proof. In other words, people now. I know very few people, anecdotally, whose next car is going to be internal combustion. When people talk about their next car now, it's pretty universal, at least in my world, that that's going to be electric. And it may not be a total sample size, but I think it's pretty telling. And some of the goals that our car companies have, that cities and countries have, I think Israel goal is to be 50% by 2030. I think these are achievable goals.
Of new cars or cars in the street?
It's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I think new car sales, could be wrong. Various jurisdictions have different goals, and it's not clear whether they're anything other than aspirational, but still, Uber also, they say that their cars are all going to be are all going to be electric by 2030. Not clear exactly how they're going to do that.
How are they going to do that with their business model? Yeah. Doesn't make...
Well, that's why we have a portfolio company taking them on thus far in New York called Revel. Revel already today.
Tell us about Revel. How are you taking on Uber?
Yeah, Revel today. You can hail a Revel in New York City the same way you hail an Uber, and
I love that. Hail a Revel. What a great sentence. Yeah, go ahead.
And you'll be picked up in a bright blue Tesla Model Y. And with a driver that we've hired and trained and brought to your destination at about the same price as Uber. So the way I tell people that I know that Revel is having success, not because I'm on the board and I see the numbers, but because I continue to get selfies of my parents in the back seats of these Revels. And believe me,
I love that.
if the Uber were cheaper or the cab was faster, they'd be doing that. But it is a very good consumer experience, and more importantly, and this will be interesting to you, I think, Revel is using this fleet of ride share vehicles in New York to build out infrastructure, and that means DC fast charge infrastructure throughout New York City, which no one else is doing. Why not? Because there's no demand for it. So Revel is bringing its own demand. But then, like AWS, for example, which Amazon had to build for its own business, but then became a huge business on its own, Revel's overbuilding the DC fast charge network. Why? Because, like we talked about, the city of New York says all their taxi cabs are going to be electric by 2030, and Uber says that all their cars will be electric, and the delivery vehicles have a very strong economic incentive to be electric. So where are they all going to charge? I think they're going to charge at Revel fast charge stations around New York and soon in other cities.
That's really fascinating. That's cool. But is there a new technology there, or are you just taking two things people love with, let's say, it's like the ride sharing app on convenience plus adding electric plus luxurious cars and rewrapping that as a new offering, or is there a different technology there? that
Yeah,
specifically?
it's all those things. I mean, we have some technology in the back end as well, and building a great brand and a great business. Yeah.
Yeah, that's difficult, especially because you're building a marketplace, which I've done. It's very hard for cyber influencer marketing. It's very hard. Okay, I want to shift a little bit gears. I want to bring it back to Israel for a minute. Something I'm a little passionate about as a free market guy. I live in Pardes Chana, kind of in the north-ish, and I can't get a Get taxi or any ride sharing for the life of me. Currently, there is, and I know you said you're close with Shimon Peres. You're involved a lot with the government. You know what's going on, especially when it comes to automotive. Pardon my vent for a moment. It drives me insane that one, even in peak hours, I couldn't even get, let's say, Get taxi in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa, and that I can't ever get one up where I am. And the reason is because you can only drive a Get, or let's say an Uber, which I read that Uber is going to try to come back into Israel, but only go through the cabs, is the fact that, let's say, the taxi lobby is pretty damn impressive. For those that don't know, the taxi used to have their own political party, the taxi cab driver party, which is just ridiculous. You wonder what was like 1 out of 10 people, taxi drivers. This is like 40 years ago. So I can't get one because there's no incentive, and the service for taxis therefore are terrible. So if I want to catch a cab, I can't rely on a Get where I am. I call the taxi, and like I'll give you an example. So I called to get a cab to go to Tel Aviv last week, and I was like, it was like 6:30, and I was like, can you guys pick me up at like 7:40 to take me to the train? They go, call us 10 to 15 minutes in advance. And I was like, I've been using them forever, right? And they do, and they'll come. But I was like, I need to know. Can you just sign me up and say yes? There's no reliability. There's no competition. They can be rude to you. And it's a customer service issue where people, I think in Israel, just, it's the old establishment card, let's say. Are we ever going to, do you think, since let's say you have, let's say, some connections in government, at least when it comes to, or some experience, at least when it comes to dealing with automotive and technology, do you think we're ever going to be able to easily get a ride sharing app, not only through taxis like we can, let's say, in the United States and other nations?
Well, I mean, you've asked me about the future of advanced technologies and about all of these various energy prospects and so forth, and I can speculate on that. I can't really speculate on the future of Israeli political will. I know there's a story that, I can't validate and might be apocryphal, but sounds plausible to me, which is that I think not that many years ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu was at the Davos Forum and met with Travis when he was still the CEO of Uber, and was so impressed with him that he came back and said to his transportation minister,
Yisrael Katz. I remember, and he said no. I remember this. I was infuriated
of the power that you described of the taxi lobby, and that was the end of that. And yeah, it is very sad. I have the same experience that you have. I rely on Get a lot, and because there's a constrained supply that does not open up when there's more demand, as it does in other places in the world, most other places in the world where they have actual free markets, then I can't predict when such political will happen here in Israel, but I sure hope it's not too far in the future.
All right. So which brings me to the question I always have when it comes to huge technology infrastructure and things of the future. Is the government in the way or the solution? Then you can't say both. I'm making you pick. You can then say both, and then you can say and elaborate. But like, do you find them more to be an obstacle and getting in the way with regulation and that and things, right? All right. You talk about the bomb.
We're talking about the government of Israel?
In general, I mean, both. Let's say the governments of the West and the government in Israel in particular, which what I care most about, because I'm here, my audience cares for. But I just want to say, like, I feel like sometimes the Israeli government does a pretty damn good job of helping encourage and advance and nurture technology. And on the other hand, I'm like, holy crap! Like, why? Like, like you were saying about,
Israel,
bring Uber. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Israel lives an unusual duality that may be unique in the world, to have this country that was built on a foundation of socialism, then suddenly confronted with the the free market forces of the technology world in such a dramatic way, and these two things right now, coexist in a very strange way. I tend to think that the private sector and the free market are the best arbiters of most things, and yet there are some things that just can't be done without the intervention and support of the government wherever you are. Anyone who doubts that, should read my favorite book and the longest book I have to say I ever got through, which is The Power Broker by Robert Caro. The story of
how big is that book?
Oh, it's I don't know, maybe 15 or 1800 pages, something like that. It was like 5 years of Shabbos afternoons, but well worth it. And you learn not only about how New York City's infrastructure became as screwed up as it is, but you also learn a lot about power. Yeah, it's there's no way around the fact that these two things do have to coexist in some form.
What a political answer. So got it. Okay, so yes and no, basically. Yeah, it's a challenge. I find that it's probably the biggest obstacle and also the biggest opportunity at the same time. But I don't know how to move forward solution. I don't have enough experience there to properly comment, but I get to speak to people like you that educate me more and I learn more along the way, and hopefully we can find those solutions and bring them forward. Mike, thank you so much for your time. If someone wanted to follow you, learn more about what you guys are doing.
Our website's maniv.com, maniv.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Twitter, and always open to connections.
Awesome. And I'll leave all the information about him and Maniv and how you can follow them down in the description. Thank you so much for joining Israel Unfiltered. Don't forget, guys, to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining me, Mike.
Thank you.